Behind the scenes of John Wayne's only Oscar-winning performance lay some of the strangest stories in Western movie history. From a donut mistaken for cocaine to a 65-year-old stunt double wearing a clay mask, the making of True Grit involved bizarre casting rejections, dangerous feuds between co-stars, and Wayne's obsessive relationship with his eyepatch that required daily replacements. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about True Grit. Fact 1. Elvis almost played the Texas Ranger. Before Glenn Campbell strapped on his spurs as Texas Ranger LaBeouf in True Grit, the role was originally offered to none other than Elvis Presley himself. This casting choice would have created one of the most unlikely duos in Western movie history, pairing the king of rock and roll with John Wayne, Hollywood's most iconic cowboy. The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it might sound today. By 1968, Elvis had already appeared in over 30 films, and producer Hal Wallace was actively seeking a younger co-star who could bring both star power and musical talent to the project. Elvis had worked with Wallace before on several successful pictures, making him a natural consideration for the role of the cocky young Texas Ranger who teams up with Wayne's gruff Marshal Rooster Cogburn. According to multiple sources close to the production, John Wayne himself was enthusiastic about the casting and personally approached Elvis about taking the part. Wayne reportedly asked Elvis multiple times to consider the role, seeing potential in pairing his weathered lawman character with Elvis's youthful energy. The two stars had mutual respect for each other, and Wayne believed Elvis could handle the dramatic demands of the role while bringing his natural charisma to the character. However, the deal fell apart due to the demands of Elvis's notoriously controlling manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker insisted that his client receive top billing in the film, meaning Elvis's name would appear above both John Wayne and Kim Darby in all promotional materials and credits. For a supporting role in what was clearly John Wayne's vehicle, this demand was completely unacceptable to the producers. Hal Wallace and the studio executives refused Parker's billing demands outright, knowing that giving Elvis top billing over Wayne would have been both financially and artistically inappropriate. With negotiations at a standstill, Elvis was ultimately passed over for the role, and the part went to country music star Glenn Campbell instead, who was more than willing to accept a supporting position alongside the legendary John Wayne. Fact 2. The donut that nearly started a war. One of the most absurd incidents during the filming of True Grit involved a simple breakfast pastry that almost brought production to a complete halt. John Wayne spotted white powder on Dennis Hopper's shirt and immediately jumped to the conclusion that his co-star was using cocaine on set, leading to a tense standoff that required the director's intervention to resolve. The tension between Wayne and Hopper had been building throughout the production, largely due to their opposing political views and lifestyles. Wayne, a staunch conservative, viewed Hopper as a radical hippie, whose counterculture beliefs represented everything he despised about the changing times in late 1960s Hollywood. This underlying conflict made Wayne particularly suspicious of any behavior from Hopper that seemed to confirm his worst assumptions about the younger actor's lifestyle. When Wayne noticed the mysterious white substance on Hopper's clothing, he became convinced that his co-star was openly using illegal drugs during filming. True to his no-nonsense personality, Wayne refused to come out of his trailer and demanded that the studio fire Hopper immediately for drug use. The situation quickly escalated, with Wayne threatening to walk off the production entirely unless something was done about what he perceived as Hopper's blatant disregard for professional standards. Director Henry Hathaway found himself in the middle of a potential disaster, facing the prospect of losing his lead actor over what might have been a misunderstanding. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Hathaway investigated the source of the white powder and made a discovery that was both embarrassing and hilarious. The suspicious substance that had triggered Wayne's outrage was nothing more than powdered sugar from a donut that Hopper had been eating earlier that morning. Once Hathaway explained the innocent truth behind the white powder, Wayne's anger quickly subsided, and he agreed to return to work. The incident became a running joke among the cast and crew, though it perfectly illustrated the cultural divide and mutual mistrust that existed between the two very different generations of Hollywood actors working together on the film. Fact 3. Wayne's C. Through eyepatch secret. John Wayne's iconic eyepatch as Rooster Cogburn wasn't the solid black leather accessory that audiences saw on screen, but rather an ingenious piece of movie magic that allowed the actor to maintain his vision throughout filming. Wardrobe designer Luster Bayless, who worked on over a dozen John Wayne films, faced an unusual challenge when creating the eye patch that would become one of the most recognizable props in Western movie history. Wayne was initially resistant to wearing any eye patch at all, worried about the practical difficulties of performing his own stunts and riding horses while essentially blind in one eye. Director Henry Hathaway knew that Wayne's concerns were legitimate, especially considering that the actor had already lost a lung to cancer surgery just 4 years earlier and was still recovering his full physical capabilities. The solution required some creative problem-solving from the wardrobe department. Bayliss experimented with various materials before settling on an innovative design that used window screen mesh and gauze to create an eye patch that appeared completely opaque to the camera, but actually allowed Wayne to see through it clearly. The fine mesh was painted black and layered with gauze to create the illusion of a solid patch, while still permitting enough light and vision for Wayne to navigate safely during action sequences and horseback riding scenes. What made this arrangement even more unusual was Wayne's particular demands about the eye patch's cleanliness and appearance. According to Bayliss, Wayne insisted on receiving a fresh eye patch every single day of filming because, as he put it, they got dirty. This meant that Bayliss had to handcraft multiple versions of the C through eye patch throughout the production, each one carefully constructed with the same mesh and gauze technique to ensure consistency in Wayne's vision and the prop's on-screen appearance. The daily replacement ritual became such a regular part of the production routine that Wayne would check each new eye patch every morning to make sure there was no makeup residue or dirt on the inside that might interfere with his vision. This attention to detail reflected Wayne's professionalism and his determination to deliver an authentic performance while managing the physical challenges of the role. Fact 4. The 65-year-old stunt double with a clay face. Kim Darby's fear of horses created one of the most unusual casting solutions in movie history, requiring the production team to employ a 65-year-old stunt woman wearing a custom-made clay mask to complete most of the horseback riding scenes in True Grit. Despite playing a character who was supposed to be an experienced rider from rural Arkansas, Darby was genuinely terrified of horses and could barely manage to be around them, let alone ride them convincingly on camera. The extent of Darby's horse phobia became apparent early in the production, when even simple scenes requiring her to lead a horse or mount one became major challenges for the cast and crew. According to Darby herself, she was only actually seen riding a horse for about 5 minutes of screen time in the entire film, with the rest of her equestrian scenes requiring creative alternatives to maintain the illusion that her character Maddie Ross was comfortable around horses. The production team's solution involved hiring veteran stuntwoman Polly Burson, who, despite being 65 years old, was still an accomplished rider capable of handling the demanding horseback sequences. However, the significant age difference between Burson and the 21-year-old Darby presented its own challenges for maintaining visual continuity in the film. To solve this problem, the makeup department created a detailed clay mask of Darby's face that Burson could wear during the riding scenes. The mask was carefully sculpted to match Darby's facial profile and features, allowing Burson to double for the younger actress without audiences noticing the substitution. This elaborate disguise was particularly effective in wide shots and scenes filmed from a distance, where the mask's resemblance to Darby's actual face was sufficient to maintain the illusion. The process required careful coordination between the stunt team and makeup artists, as the clay mask had to be applied and adjusted for each riding scene to ensure it matched Darby's appearance from the correct camera angles. This unconventional approach allowed the film to include all the necessary horseback riding sequences while accommodating Darby's genuine fear of the animals that were so central to the story. Fact 5. Karen Carpenter was nearly cast as Maddie. John Wayne's unconventional casting instincts almost led to one of the most surprising role assignments in Western movie history when he seriously considered Karen Carpenter for the lead role of Maddie Ross in True Grit. This unusual suggestion came about after Wayne met the future singing superstar at a college talent show that he was hosting, where he was immediately impressed by her stage presence and natural charisma. At the time of their meeting, Karen Carpenter was still several years away from achieving international fame as part of the musical duo The Carpenters, alongside her brother Richard. She was performing as a relatively unknown singer, but Wayne saw something special in her that made him believe she could handle the demanding role of the determined 14-year-old seeking justice for her father's murder. Wayne was so taken with Carpenter's performance and personality that he actively lobbied the producers to consider her for the part of Maddie Ross. He felt that her wholesome image and strong stage presence would translate well to the big screen, and he believed she possessed the kind of authentic American spirit that the character required. Wayne's enthusiasm for Carpenter was genuine, and he pushed hard for the producers to at least give her a screen test for the role. However, the producers ultimately decided against casting Carpenter, recognizing that despite her obvious talent as a performer, she had absolutely no acting experience whatsoever. The role of Maddie Ross was not only central to the entire story, but also required an actress capable of holding her own in dramatic scenes opposite seasoned performers like Wayne himself and Robert Duvall. The producers felt that casting someone with no acting background would be too much of a risk for such an important character. Instead, the role went to Kim Darby, a 21-year-old actress who had already established herself in television and film work. While Darby brought professional acting experience to the role, it's fascinating to imagine how different True Grit might have been if Wayne's instincts about Karen Carpenter had been followed and the future Grammy-winning singer had made her acting debut as the feisty Maddie Ross. Fact 6. Wayne's blacklisted screenwriter alliance. In one of the most surprising political contradictions of his career, John Wayne actively fought to ensure that blacklisted screenwriter Marguerite Roberts received full credit for her True Grit screenplay, despite his own well-known conservative political views and his previous support for the Hollywood blacklist during the 1950s. This decision put Wayne at odds with his usual political allies and demonstrated that his commitment to quality filmmaking could override his ideological beliefs. Marguerite Roberts had been blacklisted from Hollywood for nearly a decade due to her alleged leftist political affiliations during the communist scare that swept through the entertainment industry in the early 1950s. During this period, many writers, directors, and actors found themselves unable to work in Hollywood if they were suspected of having communist sympathies or associations, and Roberts was among those who suffered professionally from these accusations. When Wayne read Roberts's adaptation of Charles Portis's novel, he was immediately impressed by the quality of her work, declaring it the best script he had ever read. This enthusiasm for the screenplay created a dilemma for Wayne, who had previously been a vocal supporter of the blacklist and had publicly criticized actors and writers who he believed held communist sympathies. However, his appreciation for Roberts' talent ultimately proved stronger than his political convictions. Wayne personally lobbied producer Hal Wallace and the studio executives to ensure that Roberts received proper screen credit for her work on True Grit, arguing that her political background should not prevent her from being recognized for her exceptional contribution to the film. This was particularly significant because many blacklisted writers during this period were forced to work under pseudonyms or have their work credited to other writers, denying them both recognition and residual payments. Wayne's support proved decisive in Roberts receiving full credit for the screenplay, marking a rare instance where the actor's artistic judgment overcame his political ideology. In May 1969, just weeks before the film's release, Wayne wrote a personal letter to Roberts thanking her for what he called her magnificent screenplay, particularly praising the beautiful cemetery ending that she had created in the style of the original novel. Fact 7. The post-cancer surgery fence jump. John Wayne's determination to perform his own stunts reached dangerous levels during the filming of True Grit's final scene, when he insisted on jumping a 4-rail fence on horseback, despite having undergone major cancer surgery just 4 years earlier that had cost him an entire lung. This decision left director Henry Hathaway genuinely terrified that his 61-year-old star might seriously injure himself and create a financial catastrophe for the production. In 1965, Wayne had been diagnosed with lung cancer and underwent surgery to remove his entire left lung, a procedure that significantly reduced his physical capabilities and breathing capacity. By the time True Grit went into production in 1968, Wayne was still recovering from this major surgery and had trouble walking more than 30 feet without becoming winded. Despite these limitations, Wayne was determined to prove that he was still capable of performing the physical demands of his iconic Western roles. The fence-jumping scene was saved for the very end of the production schedule because both Wayne and Hathaway were uncertain whether the actor would be physically capable of completing such a demanding stunt. The scene required Wayne to ride his horse at full gallop through snow-covered terrain and clear a chest-high, 4-rail wooden fence, a feat that would have been challenging even for a healthy rider half his age. When the time came to film the sequence, Wayne absolutely refused to let a stunt double perform the jump in his place. According to co-star Glenn Campbell, who witnessed the event, Wayne shouted at Hathaway, "I ain't having no one jump for me. Besides, I can jump a 4-rail fence without a horse." This declaration perfectly captured Wayne's stubborn pride and his refusal to acknowledge any physical limitations. Hathaway was genuinely worried that if Wayne fell during the stunt, it could result in serious injury or even death, which would have been both a personal tragedy and a financial disaster for the studio. However, Wayne successfully completed the jump in a single take, clearing the fence with room to spare and proving to himself and the world that he was still the same tough cowboy audiences expected him to be. Fact 8. Wayne's obsession with horse Dollar. John Wayne's relationship with his horse Dollar became one of the most unusual partnerships in Hollywood history, leading the actor to sign an exclusive contract that prevented anyone else from riding the animal in films and eventually making the horse a contractual requirement for his final movie role. This extraordinary bond began during the filming of True Grit, when Wayne first worked with the 2-year-old chestnut quarter horse gelding and immediately recognized something special in the animal's calm temperament and reliability. Dollar was owned by Dick Webb Movie Productions, not by Wayne himself, but the actor was so impressed with the horse's performance and steady nature that he negotiated an exclusive movie rights contract with the company. This agreement ensured that no other actor could ride Dollar in any film, making the horse essentially Wayne's personal co-star for the remainder of his career. The contract was unprecedented in Hollywood, where horses were typically treated as interchangeable props rather than irreplaceable cast members. What made Dollar particularly special to Wayne was the horse's unflappable disposition during the chaos of movie sets, remaining calm under gunfire, crowd scenes, and the general mayhem that accompanied Western film productions. Weighing roughly 1,600 pounds and standing tall enough to comfortably accommodate Wayne's large frame, Dollar became the actor's preferred mount for all his subsequent Western films, including Big Jake, The Cowboys, The Train Robbers, and Rooster Cogburn. The ultimate demonstration of Wayne's attachment to Dollar came during the production of The Shootist in 1976, which would prove to be Wayne's final film. Originally, the screenplay contained no mention of the character's horse by name, but Wayne insisted that the script be rewritten to include specific references to Dollar. As a condition for agreeing to work on the project, Wayne demanded that his character would call the horse Old Dollar by name throughout the film, turning what was supposed to be a simple prop into a meaningful part of the story and ensuring that his beloved co-star would be forever remembered in cinema history. Fact 9. Mia Farrow's career-changing rejection. Mia Farrow's decision to turn down the lead role of Mattie Ross in True Grit became one of her most regretted career choices. A mistake that she later acknowledged cost her the chance to work alongside John Wayne in what would become his only Oscar-winning performance. The rejection came about due to some well-intentioned but ultimately misguided advice from her co-star in a previous film, leading Farrow to pass on what could have been a career-defining role. At the time True Grit was being cast, Farrow was riding high on her recent success in Roman Polanski's psychological thriller Rosemary's Baby, which had established her as one of Hollywood's most promising young actresses. Producer Hal Wallace was eager to cast her as Mattie Ross, and Farrow was initially enthusiastic about taking on the challenging role of the determined teenager seeking justice for her father's murder. However, before accepting the part, Farrow had traveled to England to film Secret Ceremony with veteran actor Robert Mitchum, and during their work together, she mentioned her upcoming opportunity to star in True Grit. Mitchum, drawing from his own experiences working with various directors throughout his long career, warned Farrow that director Henry Hathaway had a reputation for being extremely difficult and cantankerous on set, advising her to think carefully before committing to work with him. Taking Mitchum's advice to heart, Farrow became concerned about the prospect of working under Hathaway's reportedly harsh directorial style. Rather than simply declining the role, she attempted to negotiate with producer Hal Wallace to replace Hathaway with Roman Polanski, who had just directed her successfully in Rosemary's Baby and with whom she had developed a comfortable working relationship. When Wallace refused to make any changes to the directorial team, Farrow ultimately decided to withdraw from the project entirely. Years later, after seeing the finished film and witnessing the success it brought to Kim Darby, who eventually played Mattie Ross, Farrow publicly acknowledged that turning down True Grit was one of the biggest professional mistakes of her career, recognizing that she had let caution override what could have been an incredible opportunity. Fact 10. The gun chasing incident that never was. One of the most dramatic stories to emerge from the True Grit set has been greatly exaggerated over the years, with the legendary tale of John Wayne chasing Dennis Hopper around Paramount Studios with a loaded gun being far more theatrical than what actually happened during the tense encounter between the two actors. While Wayne did indeed arrive on set in an agitated state and directed his anger toward Hopper, the reality of the incident was less violent and more absurd than the popular version suggests. The confrontation began when Wayne arrived at the studio via helicopter, furious about a recent incident involving his daughter, who had attended a lecture by civil rights activist Stokely Carmichael at the University of California, Los Angeles. Wayne was outraged that his daughter had been exposed to what he considered communist propaganda. And in his anger, he began looking for someone on set to blame for the changing political climate that he felt was corrupting American youth. Wayne immediately targeted Dennis Hopper as the embodiment of everything he despised about the counterculture movement of the late 1960s. Referring to Hopper as his in-house commie and using various colorful terms to describe his political beliefs, Wayne arrived on set shouting demands to know where that pinko Hopper was hiding. While Wayne was indeed carrying a gun on his belt, as was common for Western movie sets, the idea that he was actively chasing Hopper around the studio with murderous intent was an embellishment that grew with each retelling of the story. The actual resolution of the conflict came about through the powdered sugar incident, when Wayne became convinced that white powder on Hopper's shirt was evidence of cocaine use on set. This misunderstanding escalated the situation until director Henry Hathaway investigated and discovered that the suspicious substance was simply powdered sugar from a donut that Hopper had been eating for breakfast. Once the innocent explanation was revealed, Wayne's anger quickly subsided, and the supposed gun-wielding chase never actually occurred. The incident became legendary among cast and crew members. But like many Hollywood stories, it grew more dramatic with each retelling until it bore little resemblance to the relatively mundane reality. Fact 11. Wayne modeled his performance on Wallace Beery. John Wayne's portrayal of Rooster Cogburn in True Grit represented a dramatic departure from his usual screen persona, with film critics and scholars noting that his performance bore a striking resemblance to the acting style of Wallace Beery, a popular character actor from the 1930s and 1940s. This unusual stylistic choice marked one of the few times in Wayne's career that he consciously imitated another actor's approach to creating a character. Wallace Beery had been famous for playing gruff, slovenly, but ultimately lovable characters who combined rough exteriors with hidden hearts of gold. Beery's performances were characterized by a particular blend of crude mannerisms, mumbled dialogue, and unexpected moments of tenderness that made his characters both intimidating and endearing. His most memorable roles included parts in films like The Champ and Treasure Island, where he perfected the persona of the rough-around-the-edges hero with a soft spot for underdogs. Wayne's decision to channel Beery's acting style for Rooster Cogburn was particularly surprising because Wayne had spent decades developing his own distinctive screen presence that was quite different from Beery's approach. Where Wayne typically portrayed characters with quiet dignity and controlled strength, Beery specialized in more overtly theatrical and exaggerated performances that emphasized the comic and pathetic aspects of his rough characters. Film critic and historian Gary Wills, in his book John Wayne's America, The Politics of Celebrity, specifically commented on this unusual choice, noting that it was difficult for one actor to successfully imitate another for an entire film without losing authenticity. Wills observed that Wayne's Beery-inspired mannerisms were most apparent in the broader comedic scenes, but tended to fade during more intimate dramatic moments, particularly in the scene where Rooster discusses his failed marriage and estranged son. The inspiration for this stylistic choice likely came from Wayne's recognition that Rooster Cogburn was fundamentally different from his typical heroic characters, requiring a more vulnerable and less idealized approach that Beery's established persona could provide. This creative risk paid off significantly, as the performance earned Wayne his only Academy Award and created one of his most memorable and beloved characters. Fact 12. The film was censored for a G rating. True Grit underwent significant editing to remove profanity and achieve a family-friendly G rating, requiring filmmakers to sanitize the rough language that would have been natural for characters living in the lawless frontier territories of the 1880s. This post-production censorship process involved carefully removing what the studio referred to as four-letter words from multiple scenes throughout the film, fundamentally changing the authentic flavor of dialogue that had been written and performed to reflect the harsh realities of life in the Old West. The original script and performances included the kind of colorful language that would have been typical for U.S. Marshals, outlaws, and other frontier characters of the period, with actors delivering lines that contained profanity and crude expressions that matched their rough-and-tumble lifestyles. However, the Motion Picture Association of America's rating system in 1969 was much more restrictive than it would become in later decades, and studios were highly motivated to achieve G ratings that would allow the widest possible audience access to their films. The decision to pursue a G rating was primarily driven by commercial considerations, as family-friendly films had significantly broader appeal and could be marketed to parents looking for entertainment suitable for children. A G rating also meant that the film could be shown during prime television broadcast hours and would face fewer restrictions when sold to television networks for future airings, making it a more valuable long-term investment for the studio. The editing process required careful attention to dialogue scenes where profanity had been naturally integrated into conversations between characters. Sound editors had to either completely remove offensive words, replace them with alternate dialogue recorded during post-production, or use creative editing techniques to obscure the objectionable language without making the cuts obvious to audiences. This sanitization process created an interesting contradiction for a film that was otherwise committed to depicting the violent and morally ambiguous world of frontier justice. While True Grit featured gunfights, hangings, and other mature themes, the absence of authentic period language gave the film a somewhat sanitized quality that contrasted with its otherwise realistic portrayal of frontier life. Fact 13. Wayne's daughter was originally promised the role. John Wayne's attempt to secure the lead role of Maddie Ross for his daughter Asa Wayne created one of the earliest casting conflicts during True Grit's pre-production, ultimately leading to a professional standoff between the star and director Henry Hathaway that demonstrated the limits of Wayne's influence over the filmmaking process. This family nepotism attempt represented Wayne's desire to launch his daughter's acting career with a high-profile role in what he knew would be a major Western production. Asa Wayne was one of Wayne's 7 children and had expressed interest in following her famous father into the entertainment industry. At the time True Grit was being developed, she was in her early teens and had some limited acting experience, but nothing that would have qualified her for such a demanding and central role in a major Hollywood production. Wayne, however, was convinced that his daughter possessed the natural talent and screen presence necessary to portray the determined and strong-willed Maddie Ross. Wayne's initial promise to Asa that she would play Maddie Ross was made before director Henry Hathaway became fully involved in the casting process. As one of Hollywood's most experienced and respected directors, Hathaway had worked with Wayne on multiple previous films and was known for his no-nonsense approach to filmmaking and his insistence on professional standards throughout every aspect of production. When Hathaway learned of Wayne's intention to cast his daughter in the crucial role, he immediately and firmly refused to go along with the plan. Hathaway understood that the success of the entire film depended on finding an actress who could convincingly portray the complex character of Maddie Ross and hold her own in dramatic scenes opposite seasoned professionals like Wayne himself, Robert Duvall, and Glenn Campbell. The director's refusal to cast Asa Wayne created tension between the two longtime collaborators, but Hathaway's professional judgment ultimately prevailed. Wayne was forced to break his promise to his daughter and allow the casting process to proceed without family considerations, leading to the eventual selection of Kim Darby for the role that would become one of the most memorable female characters in Western cinema. Fact 14. The film premiered exactly 10 years before Wayne's death. In one of the most eerie coincidences in Hollywood history, True Grit premiered on June 11, 1969, exactly 10 years to the day before John Wayne passed away on June 11, 1979. This remarkable timing creates a poetic symmetry between Wayne's greatest professional triumph and the end of his legendary career, marking a decade that would see him transition from Hollywood icon to cultural symbol. The premiere of True Grit in Little Rock, Arkansas represented the pinnacle of Wayne's acting career, introducing audiences to the performance that would finally earn him the Academy Award that had eluded him for over 4 decades in the film industry. At the age of 61, Wayne was celebrating not just another successful Western, but a role that would prove to be his most critically acclaimed and commercially successful performance as Rooster Cogburn. During the 10 years that followed the premiere, Wayne continued to work steadily in Hollywood, appearing in films like Big Jake, The Cowboys, The Train Robbers, and his final movie The Shootist, which was released in 1976. However, his health was gradually declining due to the effects of his earlier cancer surgery, and the ongoing battle with the disease that would eventually claim his life. The date coincidence becomes even more meaningful when considering that True Grit represented Wayne's successful transition from the traditional Western hero roles that had defined his earlier career to a more complex and nuanced character that reflected both his advancing age and his willingness to explore different aspects of his screen persona. The film proved that Wayne could still command the screen and connect with audiences even as he moved away from the straightforward heroic roles that had made him famous. Wayne's death on June 11, 1979 came after a lengthy battle with stomach cancer, ending exactly 10 years of life that had been bracketed by his greatest professional achievement. The coincidence of dates serves as a reminder of how True Grit marked both a career high point and the beginning of Wayne's final decade as one of America's most beloved and enduring movie stars. Fact 15. Wayne personally told Richard Burton, "He deserved the Oscar." John Wayne's humility and respect for his fellow actors was never more apparent than at the 1970 Academy Awards ceremony, where he personally approached Richard Burton to tell him that he believed Burton should have won the Best Actor Oscar instead of him for True Grit. This remarkable display of graciousness occurred during one of the most competitive years in Academy Award history, when Wayne was finally recognized for his decades of work in Hollywood. The 1970 Best Actor category featured an exceptionally strong field of nominees, with Wayne competing against Richard Burton for his portrayal of King Henry VIII in Anne of a Thousand Days, along with Dustin Hoffman for Midnight Cowboy, Peter O'Toole for Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and Jon Voight also for Midnight Cowboy. Burton's performance as the volatile and complex English monarch was widely considered one of his finest screen appearances, showcasing his legendary theatrical training and commanding screen presence. Burton had been nominated for Academy Awards multiple times throughout his career, but had never won, despite being recognized as one of the greatest actors of his generation. His portrayal of Henry VIII was particularly acclaimed by critics, who praised his ability to capture both the king's ruthless political cunning and his passionate emotional nature. Many industry observers expected Burton to finally receive his long-overdue Oscar recognition for this powerful performance. When Wayne's name was called as the winner, he was genuinely surprised by the victory, having assumed that his more experienced and classically trained competitors would be favored by Academy voters. In his famous acceptance speech, Wayne even joked about his surprise at winning, saying, "If I'd known this would happen, I would have put on that eyepatch 35 years ago," referring to his Rooster Cogburn character. However, it was Wayne's private conversation with Burton during the ceremony that truly demonstrated his character and professional respect for his fellow actors. By personally telling Burton that he felt the Welsh actor deserved the award, Wayne showed that he understood the difference between popular recognition and artistic merit, acknowledging that his own victory was as much about his lifetime of work as it was about his specific performance in True Grit.